Now it gives me great honour to introduce two stalwarts of republicanism. Our first guest is a Derry native, a close comrade to Martin, a former political prisoner and hunger striker who has been centrally involved in the growth of Sinn Féin for over 20 years. First elected to the Assembly in 2004 and still serving the people of Derry as MLA for Foyle, can you give a massive welcome to Raymond McCartney? Our second guest is a giant of modern Irish republicanism, whose leadership alongside Martin McGuinness has guided Sinn Féin to the strong All-Ireland party it is today. President of Sinn Féin since 1983 until he stepped down recently, he has defined politics in this island for generations. It gives me great pleasure and honour to introduce Gerry Adams.
Road Mila Mayogov and Falsa Road, Gerry Godara Aris. You're very, very welcome to Derry once more, and I'm sure you see the size of tonight's audience. I think the round of applause shows the great esteem, the great regard that you are held in Derry. And indeed, tonight is the culmination of a number of events as we remember on the first anniversary of his death, obviously Martin, a great friend and comrade to us all, but certainly I think most people look on and would say that the friendship that you had is unique in politics, perhaps throughout the world. I think people sometimes compare to the relationship that Nelson Mandela had with Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo. So that's the type of friendship that we're hoping to explore here tonight. So for my first question, since Martin's death, I've heard you been interviewed on a number of occasions. I've attended a number of public meetings that the party has held, indeed a number of private meetings. And I'm always struck by the fact that when you mention Martin, you stop and you say, I miss him, and I miss him every day. And it's very obvious that sense of loss that you have. So I'm just wondering, in those moments, and at that time when you remember Martin, what comes, what's the memories, what's the moments that comes to your mind when you remember him?
Well, Gordon Margaret, Raymond agus Tamai Fuirwick Deepsha, Goliar Fahanya and Falsha Flahu, Shin agus Tamai Han Sasta, Abai Livsha and Octogus, Kahime Rabi me Egan Shuloid and Ye, August Spishake O'Halling. I just want to say well done to every single person that was involved in yesterday's Shuloid and Hishig. It was one of the best things I was ever at. It was a brilliant event yesterday. So from all the logistics, the organisers, the stewards, every single person who took part, it was just wonderful. So I just want to commend all of those. I also have to say this is the first time I've been interviewed by someone who I admire so much as I admire you.
Yeah. The reds from the walk yesterday, just by the way, in case you're wondering.
If I get through tonight without crying, it'll be a miracle. I was just reflecting on this. You know, in the course of the conflict, those of us who have survived that, we never took time to grieve. You know, you're just going from one event, from one funeral, from one incident to another. And perhaps whole generations of families never had the time to grieve. And I think what's really striking about Martin's death and the effect that it has had is that, first of all, and there's nothing we can do about this, it was so unfair. He was looking forward so much to coming out of that position. And why wouldn't he? 10 years with Ian Paisley, Peter Robertson and Arlene Foster. And he was really looking forward, you know, 5 o'clock in the morning, he was up most mornings, down the road to Belfast or wherever else he was going. And he wasn't stepping back, he was stepping out of that public office, I suppose, in the same way as I was going to step out of the looked-on position, not to leave Sinn Féin or to leave the struggle, but to do things slightly different and so on. And he was looking forward to being with Bernie, being with the kids, particularly the grandkids, time in Donegal, but just to get out of that routine of relentless, ongoing work. So I do miss him every day, and I thought at the second Ardèche, I thought it was a bit more therapeutic, you know, but I found the event in Stormont really emotional when the portrait was unveiled. I found yesterday's event very uplifting. So it's different. It's different. It's this notion of not having grieving time before, and now having grieving time. So it comes at me in all sorts of silly little ways, and most of it isn't political. The Sunday game. You know, I would think of when the Sunday game's on last summer, Martin came into my head because he'd be watching the Sunday game. The football, the All-Ireland football, I always met him and Tom, myself and Art Geroyd generally, and myself and my brother Paddy went to the hurling, and Geroyd and I went to the football, and we'd meet now. They were treated differently from us. You know, Tom and Martin were brought into the big room and that all the we were left sitting. But we always had that. And then just little things like that just come at you. I spent 3 days on my own. Clet wasn't with me up in Donegal. I couldn't get him out of my head for the whole 3 days. No, and for the last years of Martin's life, we didn't work together. We worked together regularly, but we didn't work together on a daily basis. Like he was away doing what he was doing, and I was doing a different type of a job. So I can only guess if the likes of me is going through those sort of processes, how difficult it must be for Bernie and for Fionnuala and Grania and Emmett and Fiacre. It must be tremendously difficult at set times and at other times. And you know, I was also very taken. We were fighting the elections, as you remember, the 2 elections here in the north, and the number of people who said to me, mostly people in their sort of mid-30s, 40s, that they had grown up with me and Martin, always in their sitting room, on the TV, at whatever was happening. And the number of people, including people who would be very hostile to us, who were very taken by the suddenness of Martin's death and by the unfairness of it. So he obviously made his mark, and those of us who were privileged and honoured to be close to him share a common loss with many, many, many people who actually never knew Martin but still felt in some way an affinity with him.
And as in any friendship, and yours, I think it stretches back well over 40 years, possibly 46 years. I mean, friendships build up over the years, and I mean, it's obvious the relationships you had politically, but have you any early impressions of the first couple of times maybe you met Martin, and what was your first impressions of him?
Well, I often say, and it was only when I was talking to you on the way up in the car when I phoned you, I often say that I first met Martin in Free Derry behind the barricades. That was actually the second time I met him. I was in prison, I was interned, and I was released. And myself and Daithí O'Connell, I was taken straight from the prison to a meeting. And we negotiated out the terms of of a bilateral truce, and part of that was there was to be a meeting between a Republican delegation and the British government. So a meeting was put together of those of us who were going on that, and that was in Dublin. Miles, he was a solicitor.
Shevlin.
Miles Shevlin was a solicitor. I think it was in his home in Dublin, and that's the first time that I met Martin. And we were the two young guys. They were all men. We were the two young guys there. I hadn't met Martin before. I'd been in Derry before, but hadn't encountered Martin. I knew him by reputation, and I presume he knew of me. And the way the more senior people were coming at this meeting with the Brits, it was going to be very formal. And in the course of it, I said, look, I don't think that's the way to deal with these folks. You know, that's what they're used to. We should be dealing with it separately and in a more unorthodox way. And Martin made the same point. So even though we didn't know each other, it was clear that we had some sort of common notion of how to conduct ourselves. The next time, which is the time I wrongly tell people was the first time, was behind the barricades here. We were taken by chopper. Actually, your crowd had just abducted 2 British soldiers.
The first person in the audience to applaud the night was possibly the person responsible.
I was just left as usual to try and sort it out, but there you go, it's another matter. So there was a wee bit of a stand-up. But anyway, we met in a house, and we were taken up to, I think, up to the back of Cragan, and we went on a chopper, and they brought us down to Aldergrove. And Martin always tells this story. He doesn't always tell it, but he used to tell it, right? When we were walking up the gangplank into the plane, it was a British Air Force plane, right? And the guy was there in full uniform. He saluted Martin. And he just nodded at me. And then we were then taken to a British military base, which really interestingly, 40 years almost later, when we went off over the talks in Leeds Castle or someplace in England, that was the same base that we were taken back home from. And both Martin and I recollected that there was this gap of whatever it was, 40 years in between. But anyway, Seamus Toomey was there and so on. And Seamus smoked at the time. And we were going through a little place, something on Thames, and there was a big regatta on. And Seamus had run out of cigarettes, and he wanted to go and buy cigarettes. And away he went. And Martin and I went for a walk. And Seamus got lost. And the whole thing was a whole crisis thing. And then we went and we met Willie Whitelaw. And we had an interesting enough discussion. I recall he was very, very nervous. And I don't mean that as anything, there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody's nervous. Martin gave him a really hard time. Bloody Sunday had just happened earlier on in the year. Gave him a really hard time over Bloody Sunday. And I think actually Whitelaw was a bit taken aback by the forthrightness of Martin's attitude to it. And I made the mistake at the end of the meeting, because we were to meet again, and Whitelaw says if the things breaks down, then all bets are off. And I've been a bit stupid, said to him, yeah, all bets are off. Being a sort of young buck. And I was arrested about 14 or 15 or 16 months later, and they were beating the shit out of me in the barracks. And the guy said to me, all bets are off, Gerry.
They sure were. They sure were. And in terms then, I mean, obviously 1972, and then you were in prison for a number of years. And I think it's well documented that you got out, and then, nearly then the presidency of Sinn Féin. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the relationship developing, was early then when you were becoming the president, was Martin someone you said, this is someone I want to be close to me, around me, as I try to put Sinn Féin to the place you wanted it to be?
Well, if I can just back up a wee bit, we're talking about here about 1976-77, which is, a good 7 years before I ended up as Uachtar on Sinn Féin. But what we were doing was discussing the need to build a radical Republican Party which had popular support, and the need to develop the primacy of politics, and so on and so on. And I actually had written a little bit in prison when Donnie Lennon was killed. Donnie was a volunteer. He had been in Cage 11 with us. He was the driver of a car. He was shot dead, and the car knocked down Mrs. Maguire and her children, and they were killed, and the peace people come out of that. And I remember writing at that time a little pamphlet about peace. So the issue of peace, of building an open democratic political party, and so on and so forth, were issues that a bunch of us started to coalesce around. And I have to say that Mitchell McLaughlin played a key leadership role in some of the processes. He was very upfront, very provocative in terms of putting the hard questions before us. And how I ended up in the leadership position was that there previously had been two last Uachtarans of Sinn Féin, two Sinn Féin vice presidents, and it was been reduced to one. And Martin grabbed me at the back of the Ardèche and ordered me to put my name forward. So that's how I ended up in that position. When we then, and it's interesting, just this issue, before I became president of Sinn Féin, you tended to work in your own little world. So the issue of abstentionism and so on and so forth, and from Leinster House, wouldn't have been a big issue for me. But once you ended up with a responsibility, then you had to deal with these issues. And within 3 years, we dealt with them. Yeah. And Martin was one of the people that I sought out, particularly in terms of developing a peace strategy, to be part of that. I mean, I consciously went to him and asked him to be part of us trying to develop these thoughts. And I don't want to give the impression that I had some master plan or anything else, because I didn't, or that any of us had any blueprint, because we didn't. What we had were questions, and a willingness to discuss the questions and to argue them out and to find answers for the questions, which was all about advancing the broad Republican struggle, the democratic objective of ending partition, of ending the union with Britain, bringing about a united Ireland, and then advancing from there with a vanguard party into building a republic based in 1916. So Martin was very, very, very central to all of that.
Well, in your opening remark, you spoke there about the ability, or rather the inability, or the space sometimes to grieve. And when you look back, and even tonight in the montage, one of the things that strikes me over a long number of years is the number of funerals that you and Martin would have attended, and at that time dealing with the loss of volunteers, of members of Sinn Féin, and even Republicans in areas. And I often wonder, that when you were doing, and both of you and him were doing that particular role, but you also obviously have to keep in mind that there were wider issues in terms of the politics of the struggle and keeping the struggle going. And from a personal point of view, obviously 1981, the hunger strike, the key role that you and Martin played in that and trying to resolve it. But the backdrop and very much part of it was what people grieving. Would you ever discuss how you cope with that, or was it just something that came instinctively, or just something that you knew you had to do?
I can't recall us discussing it as a topic. We did, of course, discuss the particular circumstances. You know, if a volunteer was killed or a member of Sinn Féin was killed, and we did discuss, you know, whatever the outcome that was of us going to the wake house or going to the funeral or the chapel. I have a huge affection for Gerry, and I think that Gerry has played a very, very unique role in this struggle. But I can only recall, and some people do it for a wee while, 2 people from Derry who travelled on a long-term basis out of Derry, you know, and one was Mitchell McLaughlin and one was Martin. And I still have an abiding memory. A woman called Teresa Clinton was shot dead on the Lower Ormer Road, and she was the wife of Jim Clinton, who was a Sinn Féin activist. Teresa wasn't, to my recollection, a member of Sinn Féin herself. She was the spouse of a man who was. And Belfast was difficult, bitter, twisted, tragic, threatening. And I have an abiding memory of us going down the Lower Ormer Road. It was a very wet, dank day, and the road was cleared of all traffic. And it wasn't a huge, big funeral that you would see. It was a big funeral, but it wasn't a huge, big funeral. And Martin McGuinness was there. And I remember being very taken by that he had travelled into this dangerous place to be with that family and to be with the rest of it. I mean, the people who kept us going through all of that, generally speaking, were the families. That's the people, you know, some people were Republican, or some people mightn't have been Republican, but they respected their son or their daughter or their husband or their wife, the person who had been killed. And they always welcomed us. You know, if there was a problem with the family, you know, we obviously would have been told that, and we would have known that. But the people who gave us our strength through all that period, and I don't know, I can't remember, Raymond, whether you were out or not when the Battle of the Funerals happened.
No.
You were in?
Yeah, I was inside, yeah.
I mean, that was something to behold. You know, it's quite amazing. Like, I come up here for a funeral, and I can't remember now whose funeral it was, and I got the car to drop me because I didn't want the car to be near the wake house, and I turned into an entry which was going to lead me into like a car park at the back of garages attached to an estate. There's about 400 RUC men, and they all hissed as I walked through them, you know? And they just dragooned. You know, there were scenes there with a funeral. I remember coming up the wee streets up from the river where the coffin was being handed over the crowd, being passed. I remember Paddy McSheffrey's funeral and Paddy Deary's funeral. As we were up at Cragan Heights, a volunteer came forward and fired a volley of shots, and the RUC hit the funeral, and one of the lads' coffins nearly hit the ground. We were grappling with it. I got a crack across the back of my head. Remember Sleggan, you know Cleaky Clark? The late Cleaky Clark. I remember Sleggan Cleaky Clark. I said, before the RUC charged at us, you were standing beside me. And I looked up, you were in a woman's bedroom looking down at us. But we went to the graveyard, and we couldn't have done that without the Gerry and the McSheffrey families. And if I recall properly, we did this a few times, but if I recall properly, we got the mourners to face the IUC, to turn and face them. I know Martin did that in Milltown Cemetery as well during some event like that. So you know there were other funerals which were less. And remember, this was a policy by the Catholic hierarchy, the British, the state, to criminalise part of the criminalisation, because you couldn't have criminals who were being treated like soldiers by their communities. It was very short-sighted, very stupid. Put families through awful trauma. I was away at Larry Marty's funeral, but Martin was there for the whole of that, stand-up. So anyway, the short answer to your question is that the people who sustained us to go through all of that was the families themselves. Herman, I think, wasn't it Herman? Jack Herman?
Yeah,
was it?
yes. Yeah.
I remember reading that he was instructed, his senior officers told him to stop attending funerals because it was having an effect. It was having an effect.
Yeah. And in terms, and you're talking about that, the great store, that sense of collective, that sense of being part of a struggle based on people and the ability of people to resist. But there's absolutely no doubt, and it can be a bit of a cliche, but it's also true that leadership at times can be a lonely place, because ultimately decisions have to be made, and particularly in the struggle that we were involved in. And you've already reflected on abstentionism. You could say the advent of the peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, dealing with the issue of arms beyond use, and even policing and justice. And I'm just wondering then that relationship, because people would have been part of the discussion, the briefing, the family meetings, but then ultimately, people like yourself and Martin had to make decisions. And what was the relationship there? Because, in many ways, Martin was chief negotiator, but you were president of the party. What was that dynamic, and how did that work out?
It worked out very well, and we got better at it as we went on. It was quite unique. I think one of the unique things that happened, and it's just an accident, was that for 10 years the leadership of republicanism and the leadership of the British government remained constant. The leaderships of the SDLP, the Unionist parties, the Irish government, the American White House, they all changed. But there was Blair, there was Powell, there was Martin, and there was me, and others. Now, I believe firmly that politics has to be about empowering people. So I've always been a team player. I've always seen myself as a team player. If I bring any sort of talent to it, I like to think my ability to build teams and to shape teams and to build the collective. So broadly speaking, a lot of our decisions were collective decisions, and we would reach a consensus on it. When I said earlier that we got better at it, there were some issues which we wouldn't have contemplated. You mentioned policing and justice. But once we realised that we had to deal with policing and justice, then we knuckled down to deal with it. Yeah. And if you recall, the Irish government said we wouldn't get additional powers. Yeah. The SDLP, Seamus Mullen, famously said we wouldn't get additional powers, and they were all trying to shoehorn us in to a lesser position than what we thought was necessary. So that's what I mean when I say we got better at it. In terms of the issue about, and I'm very proud of this. We found it very difficult to do business with David Trimble because David, I think, was intellectually for the process, but emotionally had great difficulty. So he just changed from day to day, and he wasn't helped by his party. I remember telling him one time that I couldn't negotiate with his whole party because he would have said, "Would you have a word with Ken McGuinness? Would you have a word with and the whole role of him and to talk to me or to talk to me and Martin." So that's when I use the expression "we got better at it." that when we saw that we couldn't do the business with Paisley, we decided to with Trimble, we decided to try and do the business with Ian Paisley. And we would have been laughed out of it if we had come into Gerry and said, look, we have a plan here, we're going to try and get Ian Paisley on board. People would have got us locked up. But what we did was we very, very consciously removed every single obstacle that he was putting up. And I remember very, very well, we met Blair. We thought we had Paisley at the point where he would do a deal. We thought he didn't want to do the deal because it would cause too much difficulty for his party. And we said to Blair, Paisley's going to come to you. He's going to say, I can do a deal with the Shinners, but I can't do it now. And what we said to Blair was, send him to us. Don't give him an inch. Tell him you're bringing Dublin into it and send him to us. And I got a phone call. I was in Dublin at an Ardcolia meeting, and I got a phone call from Blair to say that Paisley had went to him. Sorry, it was the night before, Friday night, that Paisley had went to him, and he had told him to go to us. And I phoned Martin, who was here in Derry. And I said to Martin, the DUP will meet. If you go, I'll go to the Ardcolia. So that's a wee example of, you like, of us being able to strategise and come up with a position. And some of it was down to that uniqueness of the consistency and the constancy of, at least on our side and on the British government side, of having a continuity of leadership.
And already tonight we have found out that the British Army were prepared to salute Martin but not salute you, right? And then we found out that Martin McGuinness ordered you to be Vice President of Sinn Féin, right? So I'm just wondering now, when you then made Martin Chief Negotiator, was that the turn in the favour, or what did you see in Martin made him Chief Negotiator?
Well, he was. I said earlier that I very consciously went to Martin as part of that kitchen cabinet, if you like, that worked at trying to deal with some of these issues. And he was the best person. He was the best, by any shot. He was the best person for the job. And I mean, I actually talked about this to Martin a few times over the years. Martin responded to people on an emotional level. Martin would, if he met you for the first time and he liked you, that was it. And sometimes, of course, he made mistakes because we all do that. And that's a very good quality in terms of being able to have an affinity with people and deal with people and so on. But he also responded to nonsense in a very forthright way, whether it was internally, but mostly in terms of the relationship with particularly the British government and with various secretaries of state. And there are two phases to this. There's the phase which mostly involved the British government, and what governed the British government's attitude to the whole thing, and this includes Tony Blair, was how much the unionists could put up with. And then, when we got devolution back in place, neither of the two governments had as great a role because it was mostly Martin and the rest of our team dealing with the unions and the SDLP and the Alliance Party. So there are two sort of phases to all of this. So there were at times, there was some event happened here in Derry. I don't know what it was, but Martin was Deputy First Minister at the time. And Charlie Flanagan, who was the Minister for Foreign Affairs, made he mightn't have meant it, but he made some joke, which was actually a disparaging remark about Martin. And then we come back. I wasn't at the event, but we were meeting with the Irish government. We were meeting with Charlie Flanagan in Stormont one day, and we did our business. And then Martin, in front of everybody, went through Charlie Flanagan for a shortcut. Just head-butted him straight up front give him read the Red Act to him. So he had that ability to confront what he would have seen as messing or not appropriate. He didn't get on with Peter Mandelson.
He must be really bad.
I'll tell you two stories about Peter Mandelson. I haven't told these stories before. I used to spend a lot of time on Sundays at Hillsborough.
My beautiful continuity assistant has informed me that there's a slight fault in your microphone, so they're just going to come out.
Was I talking to myself?
I just want to say up to now, he was making a wee bit of sense. Let's probably get
These
him.
ones?
Want to just swap us on?
Right. All right. Well, that was nice, Raymond, just the two of us sitting here.
They heard me. They definitely heard me. I heard them laughing a few times at me.
Are we on now?
Just leave that there.
That guy that came out there is Richard McCartney, right? So, way back in the day when you were making speeches at the Ardèche, can you hear me?
Yeah.
When you were making speeches at the Ardèche, they used to photocopy them and all this and use all sorts of stuff. Anyway, Richard made a mess of it, and he said to me, I've only got 4 pages of this speech, but if you start it, I'll be out before you finish, right? So I told the Ardèche, I said, Richard McCauley's going to come out here on his hands and knees.
Yeah. To give you the rest
to give me the rest of the speech. So we got a huge burst of applause. Come out and get a burst of applause now. Come on. Come on.
You spoke there, I mean, anybody that knows Martin or anybody speaks of Martin, like, Martin was obviously a very, very warm, generous, as you say, always was empathetic towards people. Indeed, there was nights there when Martin would have tweeted out, he was out walking with buttons. We used to all hold our breath. We were bound to get a phone call saying, I met a wee woman tonight and she needs something done. So that was his nature. But at the same time, you have talked about that resolve, that ability, that when he had to face people down, particularly during the negotiations, he had it, and you've told us a number of examples. But in all of that sort of times of like the high wire political stuff, was there any, if you like, moments of light relief where perhaps, the unexpected happened, or, people, because I think sometimes to keep yourself sane, you need a bit of levity and things that you do. And have you any examples of Martin bringing that to situations?
He spoke at an Ardèche about 3 years ago, and we were having some difficulties with the unionists, and he said, I used to go up to McCartney's. That's how he started it. I used to go up to McCartney's in the alleys, and I'm saying to myself, I wonder where this is going to go. By the way, he was terrified of my Twitter account. But anyway, he said, I used to go to McCartney's and we'd spend the summer there, and we'd be cutting the turf and coming back and on top of the big trailer behind the tractor, and it was great. And one day McCartney lifted up a chicken and set it down and cut its head off with a hatchet. And she set the chicken up, and the chicken ran all around the street. He said, I was at a meeting with the unionists the other day, and it reminded me of that.
Very good, very good, very good, very good.
He was also very fond of a woman. It's a house that me and Clet and I live in, and I used to meet Martin in the house when he came to Belfast. And the house belonged to Kathleen Thompson. Kathleen Thompson was Kathleen Largy, who was the main, herself and her husband at that, previously Eamon Largy, were in the flying column. Older people who might know about the flying column. And Kathleen had a great heart. She was a wonderful person and a great singer. And she always insisted on Martin getting fed. And he used to travel, even though he would have been on the run, he used to travel a lot by train. And quite a few times, and he was on the gallop, he wouldn't have had time to eat. And he used to tell us quite often, she would have put him into the passenger seat of her car and handed him his dinner on the tray. And, you know, West Belfast was like a British military camp at the time. And she would have been driving them down, and he would have been eating his dinner on the way down. So, I mean, Martin had the ability, in terms of stories like that, of just livening up. I remember Sean Keenan, young Sean Keenan, died, and the Keenans were very great friends of Martin. Sean, I'm sure he was a good friend of yours as well. There's actually a very touching photographs in terms of a lot of these photographs where old Sean and young Sean and somebody else, I forget who it is, and Martin and
Phil O'Donnell was
Phil O'Donnell, yes, yeah. God rest him. Yeah. And old Sean's actually holding Martin's hand. It's a very touching sort of photograph. But anyway, poor old young Sean died, and Martin came down, and he was given the oration at the funeral, and you were there.
Yeah.
And this is this notion of storytelling, and
I'm going to be like Martin McGuinness now and laugh because I know the story.
Well, the graveyard was a wee bit elevated, and just by chance, a lot of the tombstones and the Celtic crosses, they were all. And I sat down, I was about 15 feet back off it, I sat down, and it was like being in a little natural sort of auditorium. And it was a nice day, the sun was shining, and Martin was talking about Sean, and of course, famously, Sean's brother had introduced Bernie and Martin a way back, the lad who was killed, Colm, who was killed here. So Martin's talking about this and talking about Sean. And he said, you know, one time there was an incident at the barricades on the Lone Moor Road, and a number of volunteers were sent down to sort it out. Apparently, there was somebody down there stripping the metal off a bus that had been put on the barricade. And the person had a donkey and cart. And he was putting this, whatever it was, copper or whatever it was, into the cart. So the volunteers arrived down and said, you're not allowed to do that. That's here for the defence of the people of Free Derry. And the man said, well, I have my family to feed. And one of the volunteers produced a pistol and pointed at him and said, if you don't stop that, I'm going to shoot you. And the man said, look, son, you're not going to shoot me. Won't catch yourself on. I'll be out of here in 20 minutes. You boys go about your business. I'll be out of here in 20 minutes, right? Now, Martin didn't say who did this. But he says, another volunteer produced a weapon and put it to the donkey's head. So anyway, here we are at this funeral of this guy who we all knew and loved. Sean Keenan was a great character and he lived in West Belfast for that period of his life, and he was greatly loved by all of us. And Martin was lightening the thing up just by telling this story. So he had that capacity, as I say, to storytell and lift people.
A couple of nómada hen V2 counts for Martin ag fire and Sunday game. Well, via sig agan den a goro sim more grab more le Martin le click a Gaelic. So I'm ro Emriach Rivsa lesh far as Dara August far as Intron and there V2 counts for Gaelic games.
Yeah, well, Ahan Blaine ag an Urshaw. Ahan Blaine nor a image ag Crennu Cor Martin Cashed. Who's going to win the hurling? Who's going to win the football? August, who image, you know, our Fud and Shumra, August, you know, Mayo, Dublin, Derry, Tyrone, whatever. August, Peace them more, Aga. A wada hen, there well, couple of ruddy sort of, well, Neil Grammer, but Cun Rud Bronach. There be and Sam McGuire and Shaw, Neil Sugden Kenner and Ocean, but be say
93.
93, Tamil Fado, Henry Encore. Anyway, big Brian McGilligan, as Dun Gibbon, be say Gubber and Shin, Egg and Cragan. So, for me, Ganzi Dura, August Hug me Ida Bran, August Furshay, Imahuri, Anam, Ashinu, or in Ganzi. So, Dirt made Lumpin. Tony mentioned Martin. I shouldn't sort of fehableno him. August Bishay, I'm a chalk sugmasa, Sakofra, August Rin me arm with we, Rin me arm with we, Rin me arm with we. August nor a Furshay chin, Hui me go G and Shapa, August Fur me frame more. August Cor me Cor and Shapa, Ganzi, August Hug me D. And Fakra stole it, if I remember rightly. I was saying there, for those of you who don't have Gaelga or don't understand my Gaelga, when Gerry won the All-Ireland, I got Brian McGilligan to get all of the players to sign the jersey. And it was in my house since 93 up until last year, just landing on the top of the wardrobe. And I got it framed to give to Martin. And the plan was to give it to him when he got out, but I got a bit in the orm, so I just got a bit worried that he just mightn't get out, so I brought it up to him. Another time when I was watching a game in Casement Park and it was televised, he phoned me and he said to me, I've noticed every time there's a point or a goal scored against Derry, you're applauding. So anyway, be sim, like, it just daft, I know you do as well, this daft interest in cricket, which was actually quite useful when dealing with Peter Mandelson. It was probably the only thing that they had in common like about it. But no, he was interested. Yeah. Like the rest of us, if Ireland was playing Tiddlywinks, he'd be supporting Ireland. But he had an interest in all sport, and he actually hadn't been at a hurling final until about maybe 3 years ago. And at such, Antrim is more of a hurling county than it is a football county. And football's usually just for keeping hurlers fit. But he was so taken by the atmosphere and by the skill that he talked about it for months afterwards, just the sheer beauty of the game of hurling.
One of the iconic photographs, I'm sure it's in that montage, is the photograph of Bernie in Martin with Nelson Mandela. I think it was at the Special Olympics in Croke Park when they were here. But what was the relationship like with yourself, Martin, and particularly Nelson Mandela?
Well, Clat was with us as well. There are two sets of photographs. I'll tell you another wee story. Maybe I shouldn't tell you this, right? Yeah. Barbara de Bruyn and Gerry Kelly got their photograph taken with Nelson Mandela. And the two of them were standing each side of him. And I went to Gerry Kelly's house, and it was just him and Mandela. And then I went to Barbara's house, and it was just Barbara. But anyway, there's two photographs. There's a photograph of me and Martin and Bernie and Clet and Madiba, and then there's separate photographs. But is this true? When we went in to see Mandela, the two of them started crying. Clet and Bernie started crying when they saw Mandela. Yeah. Mandela was... Mandela was... I might have met him more often than Martin. I'm not sure about that. But Martin actually had a very memorable engagement with him when he led a delegation to South Africa. That was a daft thing, the DUP were there as well, but the DUP actually asked the government, this was the Liberation government, for a system of apartheid. They didn't want to be in the same plane, they didn't want to be in the same bus, they didn't want to be in the same meetings and all that stuff, And it was it was actually a bit daft, and Mandela handled it very, very well. But Martin used to enjoy telling this story. After the visit was over, they were going for a day out down to the very tip of South Africa, right down to the very, very, very tip. But the Unionists refused to fly in the same plane as Martin and the rest of the guys, right? So the South Africans put on like a fighter jet, right, to bring Martin and the crowd down. So they were down like in a shot, and the rest of them trundled along in this old beaten up airplane. But when they got down, and I forget who it wasn't Madiba, but he opened a hamper of food, and he set the hamper out, and he took out a bottle of Irish whiskey, and he poured himself a drink, and Martin didn't drink whiskey, and he said, "Up the Republic." Martin took great joy out of that. Mandela was very loyal to the people who stood with him. Yeah. So the Irish Republican and Ireland generally stood against apartheid. And there has been a book written by a man, his name just escapes me, but he was a senior minister in the government, and I have no personal knowledge of this except what he says. But he says that the IRA went in and assisted them in some of the big operations that they did in South Africa, where I think they bombed the oil refinery and different things like that. And it was the same with Cuba, it was the same with other places that were loyal. Mandela was very loyal. So he was very loyal to us. And one of the things that was interesting for us, we had, as I said earlier on, no blueprint. We were dealing with things, and we had worked out our own strategic objectives, and we were working our way through it. And when we went to deal with the South Africans, and they took us through what they had been doing, we were doing exactly the same thing. And that was a great boost to our confidence. And you mentioned Walter Sisulu. Walter Sisulu he didn't look unlike Sean Keenan, old Sean Keenan. And he did a huge amount of time in prison. And he was just so open to us. And he told us that when they were going on hunger strike, they used to call it a Bobby Sands. And Mandela actually, in his diary, his calendar actually, wrote about Bobby dying. And we went to Robben Island. Subsequently, I unveiled a monument to the hunger strikers in Robben Island. And Robben Island was being run then by a mixture of former prison officers and former prisoners. So the guy that was with us, they're just exactly like us. Like it could be from the Bogside or Brandywell or Ballymurphy, and he was telling about all the stories. And I was having a crack with him, you know. He would say to me, we used to get our hot food there, and I would say, I mean, you've got hot food? What sort of a prison is this? And we used to put our bedroll down there. Did you have bedrolls? Anyway, they took all that in good part.
No, looking back, you know, if we ask this question, when and where do you think Martin McGuinness was at his most content?
I think he was at his most content when he was with his own clan. I think that was the epicenter of his life. Now, obviously, he was also at his most content when he was out on the Stretcher River with a fly fishing rod, or if he was watching some sporting event. But, you know, I said at the beginning of this discussion, you know, about the unfairness of his death, because he was so looking forward to being relieved of the burden of the 5 o'clock in the morning. And you said earlier on about the loneliness of leadership. I mean, I came out of this position, and it was part of a plan that we put together collectively in terms of the regeneration of our party. And I think we're going to be extremely well served by Mary Lou MacDonald and by Michelle O'Neill and by all the other people who have come into leadership roles in recent times. But I'm going through a period now of relief, just of relief. Yeah. Now, I also go with the flow. Everybody I meet says, enjoy your retirement, or for the first week I used to say, well, I'm not retired. But then I just started going with the flow and saying, well, thank you, because it takes too long, too complicated to tell. But the relief of not having to deal with the mundane, tedious things that happen, the relief of not having to be across everything. See, everything lands on your desk, so you have to be responsible for everything. Just that relief of not having to do that. So I'm 100% certain that Martin would have felt the same relief multiplied a million times, because, of course, I was dealing with Republicans, whereas he was dealing with people who were, some of them anyway, trying their best to undermine what he was trying to do. So I think that aspect of it all is something, and as I said previously, there's nothing we can do about it. That's the way life is. And, the older you get, you read about a child being knocked down and killed at 11-year-old. You read about somebody that, like, your parents, we were talking about them earlier on. Like, they must be about 120, are they? Because you're Gerry.
Probably tell me that.
Well, I'm only going by Gerry. I'm only going by Gerry.
Yeah.
Gerry must be at least 86.
We don't discuss family business outside the family. So
it's funny, it's funny, you never know.
Yeah.
Somebody, I mean, I didn't go to the hospital that often, and that was right, that the time be left with Martin and his family. But one of the times I was there, he said to me, who would ever have thought in the summer I'd end up here looking at that scene? And he was very resolute about fighting the thing. I mean, he was totally and absolutely. I've said a million times, because I think it's the character of the man. When he was going to resign, he insisted on coming to Belfast. And I said to him, don't come to Belfast. We'll get the media to go to you. And he said, no, I want to talk to the unions. And he came to Belfast, and he went and talked to the unions, because he wanted to tell them face to face that was the nature of him. And he said to me afterwards, that was like climbing Everest. That was like climbing Mount Everest, because his heart was only, I'm going to get this wrong, but his heart, instead of working 90%, was only working something like 32%. Or, if you can imagine that. It's just, so his will and the decency in him obliged him to go to Belfast, the same way as it obliged him to go to Dermot Gallagher's funeral when he wasn't well himself. So that's the mark of the guy, that when he did something. I often say to people, give it 100%. Whatever you do, give it 100%. You won't. Your 100% won't be the same as anybody else. But give it 100%. Martin gave it 120%.
And in the aftermath of, you've talked about it, the initiative around the transition, yourself stepping aside as President, Mary Lou being in place. I heard you on the Andrew Marr show being interviewed, and this is my last question, my final question. And he asked you about what would your legacy be, and I think very cleverly you sort of said to him, you won't be around, so whatever people write, they will write, and I'm not particularly interested. But I'm just trying to imagine a situation 50 years on from now in an Ireland, based on the principles of the proclamation, and some child in school puts his hand up and says to the teacher, who was Martin McGuinness and what did he do for this country? What do you think, or what would you write now or say now on reflection that child would understand who Martin McGuinness was?
Well, it's my conviction that we can get a united Ireland in our lifetimes. Of course, you don't know how long you're going to live. That's always a problem for anybody. But we can get it in our time, if I can put it like that. That we can get Irish unity. And I don't like it when people say Irish unity is inevitable, because if it's inevitable, then we don't need to do anything. It is not inevitable, but there is an ability to actually achieve it if we all go about it in the way that we are going about it. And there's a lot of focus on the Good Friday Agreement, because the Good Friday Agreement was a very, very fine achievement. But I think the singular achievement of our time, and many of the people here are part of it, is turning what was essentially a physical force movement into a political, that was always political, but into a party political movement, which is now the second largest in this state, and only missed by a handful of votes, becoming the largest in this state, and is now the third largest in the southern states. And that 500,000 people vote for Sinn Féin across this island. So I think that's the single huge achievement, because it's only by building that political party that you're going to bring a united Ireland, but more importantly, I suppose, because it would be a great thing to have an end to partition, a great thing to have an end to the Union, but to actually have a real republic based on the 1916 proclamation. And, Martin would be the first to say it. It'll be all the small women and all the small men, all the people here who have, I was slagging about your parents, but, they have kept the faith. Yeah. All those people that opened up their hearts and their homes and saw their way through all of the difficulties and stayed focused, and then were magnanimous, that are prepared to reach out and embrace our unionist neighbours on the basis of equality, that we don't want a sectarian state. We don't want to do to them what was done to us. And sometimes people say to me, young people take this for granted. And I always say, that's great. I think that's great. Because it is actually impossible to tell anybody. I brought friends from Palestine, I brought friends from some of the Latin American states, I brought friends from South Africa to West Belfast, and they travelled to Derry and places like that. And they were absolutely appalled and terrorised by the density of the military occupation. They never saw anything like it in their own place at that time. Now, I do think that what's happening in Gaza is much worse than anything we have experienced, but I'm talking about the late 70s and the 80s. And I think it's great that our young people don't have to experience that. So, on the one hand, being part of the transformation to build a vanguard Republican Party which is ideologically committed to bringing about the type of republic that the people deserve. To work our way out of conflict into peace. And then eventually, when we get a referendum and we win a referendum on unity, Martin, with all the other people, and he wouldn't like, and he wouldn't like to be sort of, singled out and said that this is all down to him. But a huge amount of it is down to him. And what a lot of people take for granted now would not have happened if it wasn't for Martin McGuinness. So his legacy is a new Ireland. I want to finish, and I know this has been said many, many times, and I'm sure she's sick hearing it. Families sacrifice an awful lot. In your family, my family, the families of activists, and Bernie, and the 4 children, or adult children as they are now, and all the grandchildren. I said at Martin's oration that the best thing he did was to marry Bernie Connie, and I mean that.
Gerry, can I thank you for coming tonight and sharing your thoughts?
Oh,
very much.
very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Gerry, Adam.
Well done, Carl. All right.
Right, okay, move on. We're staying here. Can we stay here now?
There's more bugs in my yard.
Anyway, we've only one way to follow that, and that's with a very, very talented young lady. If you could give a very big, warm welcome to Ciara McGuinness.
Walking all the day near tall towers where falcons build their nests. Silver winged they fly. They know the call of freedom in their breath. Saw black head against the sky, where twisted rocks they run down to the sea. Living on your western shore, saw summer sunsets, asked for more. I stood by Atlantic Sea, and I sang a song for Ireland, drinking all the day in old pubs where fiddlers love to play. Someone touched the bow, he played a reel, it seemed so fine and gay. Stood on Dingle Beach and cast in wild foam, we found Atlantic bass, living on your western shore. Saw summer sunsets, asked for more. I stood by your Atlantic Sea, and I sang a song for Ireland, talking all the day with true friends who try to make you stay, telling jokes and news, singing songs to pass the night away. Watch the Galway salmon run like silver dancing, darting in the sun. Living on your western shore, saw summer sunsets, asked for more. I stood by your Atlantic Sea, and I sang a song for Ireland, dreaming in the night. I saw a land where no man had to fight, walking in your dawn. I I saw you crying in the morning light, lying where the falcons fly. They twist and turn all in your air blue sky, living on your western shore. Saw summer sunsets, asked for more. I stood by your Atlantic Sea, and I sang a song for Ireland. And I sang a song for Ireland.
My who, Ciara. It never ceases to amaze me every time I hear Ciara sing. She's absolutely incredible, but I'm sure, like so many others in the audience, when she sings, you can nearly see him smiling, his infectious smile just looking down. For he was so proud, not just of his grandwains, but also of his children. And anyone that knew Martin could tell you that it's all ever talked about. So anytime I hear Ciara sing, I can just actually see his infectious smile. And it's always difficult to go last on occasions like this, for it has been very emotional. And I have an emotional hangover, which adds to the problem. But tonight's event, I'm sure everyone will agree, has surpassed certainly my expectations. It's been an incredible event, and in fact, the events that have taken place over the course of the last few days have been testament to the man who was Martin McGuinness. And I'm sure, like many others in the room today, the last few days and weeks have brought back all of the memories and personal experiences that we've all had of Martin. But it's still hard to believe that he's gone. And the extent of that loss is more stark when you're at events like this, when you're listening to people like Gerry and Raymond reflecting on an incredible man, on a very ordinary man, but a man who led an incredible life. And we should all be thankful for that life, but we should also take great pride in the fact that we were able to be part of his life. So tonight for me has certainly been an inspiring experience. And like others, I've been asked in the past what my first encounter was with Martin, and the truth be told, I honestly can't remember, because I was one of those people who are in their 30s, not just yet in my 40s, but who grew up with Martin and Gerry and Raymond and others in the living room. I was fortunate enough to know Martin through our family. He was part of the furniture at 91 Lisfannon Park. But I certainly grew up in awe of Martin McGuinness, and listening to the testimony of, I was going to call you Martin, of Gerry tonight just brings back all of the feelings that I certainly have had for Martin over the years. Martin and Gerry and Raymond, like so many other Republicans across this city, across the north and across the island, have literally just been ordinary people who have led extraordinary lives. At a time when our people were being crushed by a state that not only didn't want them, but didn't want to treat them as equals, they all stood up in defiance and led in the defence of their people. And every single one of them have been leading ever since. They laid the foundations for my generation, which will see a new Ireland, and we age closer to that every day as days go by. So I want to say thank you to Martin, to Gerry, to Raymond, and to the countless other Republicans who have given so much of themselves to have a better life, not just for me, not just for you, but for all of the people of Ireland. And I know it's already been reflected upon today, but we can't say it enough. I want to thank the McGuinness clan, for yous have been incredible. The fact that yous have had to share such an incredible man and do it in the way that yous have done over the years is a testament not just to yous as a family, but to Martin as a people. So could I ask for a huge round of applause to all of the McGuinness clan? As I said earlier on, Martin's love for his family was evident for anyone that ever met him. And like many others who seen the image of Dulta last week in Ficker's arms, stretching out to touch his grandest face, this powerfully symbolises that that bond will never break. For Martin's spirit clearly lies within all of his clan, and his determination to create our new Ireland lives in each and every one of us who have to pledge once again to make his dream a reality. That is our goal now, and it is the most fitting tribute that we can pay to our chieftain, and we will achieve it. We are closer now than we ever have been, thanks to the sacrifice and achievements of people like Martin. So, Gerry, Martin, the rebel may have gone, but the flame he lit certainly burns strong in us all. Gerry.